How much better is the camera performance on the Galaxy S25 Ultra when comparing it to its more accessible and sleeker sibling, the Galaxy S25 Edge? For the sake of fairness, I'm immediately going to take out the Galaxy S25 Ultra's 5x sensor because that's just way out of the range for what the Galaxy S25 Edge can do. Let's be real, the Galaxy S25 Edge doesn't have a telephoto lens at all, and comparing it to a 5x is just not going to be a good comparison. Let's kick things off with still photos, and specifically starting with the ultra wide sensor. On paper, the Ultra immediately pulls ahead with a 50 megapixel sensor, while the Edge only has a 12 megapixel sensor. But aside from the megapixels, the sensor sizes are actually pretty similar. In fact, the sensor sizes are so close that it really wouldn't make a difference in the outcome. It really just comes out to how well the sensor is optimized. Plus, the 50 megapixels should technically help it get a bit more detail. Well, here's the surprise. When comparing the 12 megapixel modes on both cameras, I really couldn't tell the difference. Not even when cropping in, where the 50 megapixel will come in and give you the extra detail, I was hard pressed to find any sort of extra detail on that photo. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing on the 50 megapixel. It could just be that the 12 megapixel is performing really well and has been optimized really well. It's almost like the Edge is a bit of an overachiever here. But, and this is a big but, the Ultra gives you the option for 50 megapixel photos. And that's going to help you to crop in and get more details in that way. But the 12 megapixel options is not really showing me much of a difference. Now on to the main sensor. And this is where things get a little interesting. The Edge actually had a series of photos where it seriously underperformed. And before you ask, yes, I did clean the lens before taking the photos. So a smudge from my finger is out of the question on this one. Comparing these photos, I wonder if there's a difference in glass quality between the Ultra and the Edge. Because technically these are supposed to be the same sensors. And so the wild performance difference here is kind of shocking. What I do want to point out also is that I haven't seen this happen after this, but it was just odd that it happened in the first place. And this was a backlit scenario where the sun was actually hitting the lens. So I'm wondering if that's where the issue was. Whatever the reason, the Edge actually struggled to get a sharp photo in this series. After that, I moved on to some close-up photos of a flower, and this one showed me a different issue, which I found interesting. In the 200 megapixel mode, the Edge struggled a bit to get the flower in focus. I'm not going to stress that one out too much because I remember when I first got the S25 Ultra, the 50 megapixel mode struggled a bit to get me a good focus as well. And that's been corrected after a couple of updates. So I'm expecting the focusing issues that I'm seeing here to be resolved in a future update. And it's not that I couldn't get the photo in focus at all. I just had to step back a little bit compared to the 50 megapixel mode and compared to the Ultra. But focusing on the photos themselves, the output is actually very similar, as would be expected. A trend that I'm seeing with these photos and that we'll continue seeing in this video is that the Ultra has a bit of a warmer tone compared to the S25 Edge. That's not necessarily a good or bad thing, it's just if you prefer warmer photos, the Ultra's optimization might look better to you, otherwise the Edge might look better. But I also found that the S25 Edge has more accurate white balance compared to the Ultra. And a good example of this is the playing cards that I'm showing you now. The more I zoomed in, the more the white balance was off on the Ultra. It just kept getting more yellow and more yellow. Whereas the S25 Edge had the edges of the cards white, which is the actual color of the playing cards, and it just kept it accurate the entire time. In terms of sharpness, it's actually neck and neck. And if you compare the photos and crop in a little bit, you actually see that the Edge is a bit sharper than the Ultra. Whether that's the case for all photos, I wouldn't know, but in these sample photos I've taken, for sure I'm seeing that the Edge is a bit sharper than the Ultra overall. And for the final set of photos, we're going to be comparing the Ultra's 3x sensor with the Edge's main sensor cropped in at 3x. And in my initial thoughts, I figured that there wouldn't be much of a difference between the 3x dedicated lens versus the main sensor at 3x. And in some scenarios, that could be true, but overall, once you crop in a little bit and look at some of the details, it's not the case, and it should be obvious. I think I was just being more hopeful than anything. As expected, the Ultra's 3x lens provided more raw details and sharpness. But on smaller screens and without cropping in, the Edge kind of keeps up. However, if you're going to crop in any amount whatsoever, the 3x is going to show the gap in detail. And of course, you could always zoom in a bit more with the 3x, whereas the Edge's main sensor is kind of capped out at 3x. You could probably push it to 4x if you don't crop in or short on a big screen. However, there's a trade-off. The Ultra's 3x sensor also introduces more noise in darker areas than the Edge's main sensor. Now this noise isn't noticeable unless you really zoom in, but it's there. So it's a win for the Ultra, but with a slight asterisk for noise. Alright, now let's talk about video recording, and this is going to be with the main sensor. In well-lit scenarios, frankly, there isn't a massive difference between these two phones. Just like with photos, the most noticeable distinction is the Ultra's warmer tone in its video footage. What really surprised me here though was the stabilization. I saw a breakdown of the Ultra and Edge's main sensor, and they indicated that the OIS moved a lot less on the Edge, which means it had less stabilization. So obviously I would expect the Edge to show lack of stabilization, or at least a reduced amount, in basically any scenario. But in good lighting, the electronic stabilization on the Edge seems to perfectly compensate, making the footage look remarkably smooth and stable. So as far as the differences in the stabilization, there is none whatsoever in well-lit areas, from what I could tell. But as the lighting started to fade, that difference in OIS travel became much more apparent. The Edge's video introduced noticeable jitter much quicker and more prominently than the Ultra's. And the darker the scene got, the wider the gap in stabilization performance became. In my opinion, this is the main attribute on the main sensor that's being affected by the Edge's slim size and Samsung having to make a smaller housing for the sensor. It's a physical limitation that software can only mitigate so much. So after all that pixel peeping and video stabilization, what's the takeaway? Honestly, for most users, I don't see that the Edge is giving up any quality up to 3x. The images and video quality are up to par. It has better white balance, it has good sharpness, and even the stabilization is keeping up, only showing its limitations in lower light. But let's be clear, the Ultra is still the Ultra, and it has everything the Edge has, then some. This video wasn't about proving that the Edge was better than the Ultra. It was more about quantifying how much of a difference there is between the top flagship and its smaller sibling. And the good news, there isn't much being given up until you get to those extreme telephoto scenarios. So if capturing incredibly detailed photos and videos at longer range is a must for you, then the Ultra is really your only option. Otherwise, if you're more intent on taking closer range photos and videos, the Edge is going to provide everything you need, and in a smaller package. It's a fantastic camera in its own right and pushing the limits on a thinner profile. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you think that the Edge's camera performance was up to par or if it was lacking. Alright, I'll see you in the next one.